those aged 75.
Oh, bumbling Boris is already on.
Every eligible person.
Thank you, Thumpy's on time today. What's going on?
And with every jab
Humble apologies.
today, we have more evidence about the effectiveness of these vaccines. New research from Oxford University suggests the protection provided by the first dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine kicks in after 3 weeks and
Could do with a new
lasts
suit.
right the way through
Looks tatty,
the
that one.
booster at 3 months. And research also shows that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine seems likely to reduce transmission to others. And even if these vaccines cannot
heard all
make
this
us
before,
invulnerable,
haven't we?
and no vaccine
we
has
had.
ever given 100% protection to everyone,
We'd heard it all before.
the evidence increasingly shows that our vaccines achieve this crucial objective to reduce death and serious illness from those major strains of COVID that have been subject to research. And in the days leading up to our review point in the week of the 15th of February, we will be accumulating even more data, helped by NHS Test and Trace, so that we can begin to chart a way ahead, starting, if the data allows, with the reopening of schools on March the 8th. And I'll be setting out as much as we can about that roadmap forward on February the 22nd.
No, it makes more sense
Though
now.
today there are some signs of hope. The numbers of COVID patients in hospital are beginning to fall for the first time since the onset of this new wave. The level of infection is still alarmingly high. And
Where's the...
I'm sorry to say that we've lost another 1,322 lives in the last 24 hours alone, and our hearts again go out to every family that grieves. And the wards of our NHS are under huge pressure, with more than 32,000 COVID patients still in hospital. And so tonight, let's clap together for Captain Tom at 6 p.m. And let's clap for the spirit of optimism that he stood for. But let's also clap for all those he campaigned for, our brilliant NHS staff and care workers. And let's do everything we can to carry on supporting them. Because if we stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives, then, in the words of Captain Tom, tomorrow will be a good day. I'm now going to ask Chris to go through the slides.
Oh, here we go. Slide time.
So the first slide shows the number of people coming forward and testing positive for COVID in the UK. And as you can see, the numbers are now going down steadily. And this is backed up by other studies looking at this in a different way. So there's now a continual, steady decline thanks to the work of everyone across the entire country in avoiding unnecessary contact and staying at home, except where there are necessary things for them to do. Next slide, please. As a result of that, the number of people in hospital with COVID has now gone down from its peak quite noticeably. But as the Prime Minister said, there are still a very large number of people in hospital and more people than there were in the first peak in April last year. So this is still a very major problem.
Yeah, obviously.
One that is heading the right way. Next slide, please. And it is good to see that as a result of that, and this is always a bit later in time, lagged in time, the number of deaths in people who have COVID is beginning to come down. But as the Prime Minister said, the numbers are still extremely high. And they will stay high for quite some time, but coming down, as you can see, on this pathway. And the first effects we will see of vaccination are likely to be on these death numbers. Next slide, please. The good news about vaccination is, as the Prime Minister says, this is steadily increasing in all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, and particularly here in England. We have very...
My mum's still not had it, and she's 85 and housebound.
Day on day.
You know, there's carers coming in, but the carers have had it.
Next slide, please. So
Whoa!
the final slide, and I wanted to take a little bit of time on this slide, shows 2 things. It shows in the very dark blue bars in the centre the people who have sadly died from COVID, and in the wider bars, these are everybody who's come into hospital. And this is from a hospital study done here in the NHS system. And what you can see with this is that if you look at the red line, the top red line, this is every age group from 0 to 4 right at the bottom to 90 and over, including Colonel Sir Tom's, or Captain Sir Tom's age at the top. And if you look at the first red line, that is the group of people down to the age of 70, including people in care homes, who are liable to go into hospital because they're older if they catch COVID. And although the majority still will come out of hospital, will survive, a significant
It's like
number of those
modern art,
will
isn't it?
die. And if you take
I like
it
the
down
colours.
to 70, if you imagine that the vaccine was completely effective, which, as the Prime Minister says, you wouldn't expect for any vaccine, but completely effective, that is 83% of all the people who have died of COVID in this wave are over that age group. So they're over the age which we will get to when we vaccinated everyone over 70. But if you look at the situation for people who've gone into hospital, only 54% of all the people who go into hospital are over that age. So what this means is, once we vaccinated down to 70 and above, plus those who care for them, frontline NHS and frontline care workers, we should significantly reduce the number of deaths.
How come younger women seem to be more
the number of people
likely
because a very
to go into hospital than younger men?
who will come out of hospital, they will recover, but they have to be in the NHS and have care, for example, oxygen and dexamethasone steroid drugs. So if we then vaccinate all the way down to what's called the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, first wave, this is down to people over 50 and those who have actually got pre-existing health conditions. You then get through virtually all the people who have a high chance of dying. So this is around 98% of those who die are in that group. And importantly, around 80%, just over 80% of all of those who go into hospital. So the first wave, which is the aim is to complete on the 15th of February, we would expect a situation where we can stop a very high proportion of the deaths, but a rather smaller proportion of the pressure on the NHS, those very large numbers in hospital. As you go on to the next wave, down to those over 50, we have further inroads into reducing death and also significantly reduce the pressure on the NHS. The final point I'd like to make, and it's a cheering one, is if you look down at the bottom of this, the number of children under the age of 18 who go into hospital is, relatively speaking, very small compared to adults. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. Let's go to the public. Spencer and Hammersmith.
Come on, Spencer.
For those people who've received vaccines, are you keeping track of the number who subsequently test positive for COVID, are being admitted to hospital, and of those, how many are dying? In particular, for those who've been vaccinated but still catch COVID, are you able to tell from the data whether the severity of the illness is reduced? Thank you.
Very important questions from Spencer, and to really
Where was he from? I didn't. That accent sounded a bit American.
Degree of efficacy in the vaccines that we're using. No vaccine is 100% effective for everybody, but Chris, probably one better for you.
Thank you. It's a really important question. And yes, what we are doing is linking up the data for those who've been vaccinated with hospital admissions data, emergency admissions data, and also mortality data, people who died, so that we can actually see whether there is an effect and how, more importantly, how big the effect is, because we're sure there will be an effect of vaccination on reducing the number of people who get severe disease and have to go to hospital, and the impact on those who die. So we're making a big effort to try and link those data together so that we can give clear answers to the question that's implied in this, which is we can then say the vaccines have had this impact on mortality, on reducing deaths, and have had this impact on reducing the number of people who are getting severe disease and going into hospital.
Thanks very much, Spencer. Paul in Eastbourne.
First of all, congratulations to everyone that's been involved in the vaccination programme. I think it's something we can all be proud of. My question is related to the second dose. And it's really that if I've had my second dose and I'm socialising exclusively with other people that have had their second dose, can we ditch social guidelines, social distancing guidelines, and intermix normally? Bearing in mind that if we weren't mixing exclusively with people that had their second dose, i.e. First doses and people that have not had a vaccine at all, but we would of course still maintain all the social distancing measures in place.
Yeah, that doesn't work, does it?
Socialise exclusively when I'm exclusively with people that have had their second dose. What's the rationale? Thanks.
The rationale is
Paul,
that is the stupidest question I've ever heard.
A lot of people are starting to ask this question. I think that we really need to see more data, particularly about transmission between people who've already had the vaccine and others before we think about relaxing social distance.
Well, it looks like he was
for everybody.
around about 50. So he's not going to get the vaccine for ages anyway. So what a stupid question.
Further down the line
Sorry.
About what potential
Just
is
angry.
opened up by these vaccinations. But I think what everybody wants to see is a world in which we can relax the guidelines and the non-pharmaceutical interventions for everybody. So relax all
obviously.
the kind of restrictions for everybody, and do that by vaccinating, as Chris was explaining with the chart of the most vulnerable groups, vaccinating as many of the most vulnerable as we can, as fast as possible, and then taking a view about the interaction between that and the prevalence of the disease. At the moment, as we've discussed several times, the level of infection is still forbiddingly high for us to imagine the relaxation of the current guidelines. But we're obviously going to be reviewing that in the days.
I bet he's the kind of guy who doesn't wear a mask in the supermarket.
This idea
Something daft like that.
Increasingly towards a sort of vaccine passports, as it were.
So thank you, PM. I mean, and thank you for the question, because I'd really like to make 2 points really clearly at the beginning and then expand on them a bit. The first is, if you've just been vaccinated, there is a period of time after that when you do not have any protection. So it's very important that in that stage you realise that it takes 2 or 3 weeks, in older people probably slightly longer, to achieve any kind of protection. The second thing is, our really clear advice at the moment is please stick to the social distancing irrespective of whether you've had vaccination. Of course, because we are delaying the second dose, the great majority
Not sure yet,
are
DC.
vaccinated with 1 dose but not with 2 at this stage, but that will change.
Fancy having another go on medium.
As we start to roll out these
Because that started to get interesting, although
but
not
then
graphically
I think
brilliant.
to
But,
understand with
yeah.
these, and this is in answer to the question, what's the rationale? Vaccines are going to protect in 3 different ways. The first of which is they will protect you, the person who's being vaccinated, and they'll protect to a very good degree based on the data we have so far. Of course, we need to get more data in real life. That's what the last question was about. But we're confident it will protect you as an individual. Secondly, as you say, it'll mean that people will be able to know that many of the people they interact with
Hello.
have also been vaccinated, and that will also reduce the risk, although we don't yet know with confidence quite how much these vaccines reduce the risk of transmission. So they do reduce the risk of severe disease or symptomatic disease and of dying. They probably reduce the risk of transmission, and data came out today to support that, but we're not absolutely confident about exactly how much. And then the third way they reduce the risk is to reduce the amount of the virus that is circulating in the whole population. And that we are nowhere near being close to. And I think if you think of those numbers right at the beginning, and think back to the last published ONS data that implied somewhere like 1 in 55 people currently have the virus, the rate of virus in the community is incredibly high. So that third thing we also need to do, which is use the vaccine plus the social distancing that everyone is doing to pull the rates of the virus right down. And then if you've got very low rates in the community, you're vaccinated and your friends and colleagues are vaccinated, that will substantially reduce the risk for everybody.
Thanks very much, Paul. Laura Koonsberg, BBC.
Oh, she's back.
Prime Minister, and the vaccine programme is a huge source of pride to so many people. But can you give a firm date for when hotel quarantine will start? And will you offer more help for people who just can't afford to isolate? As you well know, not everybody is entitled to the £500 payment that is available in some circumstances. And if not, aren't you leaving 2 big holes in our defences? As one of your own MPs said, the heating's on, but the window is wide open. And Professor Whitty, with some of the measures improving, in your view, might there be a case for opening schools in England to all pupils again
Look, see the
before
studio
March, which
just
is what Wales
underneath
and
me,
Scotland look to
under
be
above
doing?
me even.
Laura, a couple of points. We have among the toughest
Sorry.
border regimes now anywhere in the world, and so we're restricting as much as we can any risk of importing new infection into this country without totally secluding the UK economy, which relies on 75% of its medicines come from Europe, 50%, 45% of our food comes from overseas. 250,000.
Right, here's the thought.
Rely on
You get to the ferry,
cut ourselves off.
you put your trailer on the ferry, you take your lorry off, and you take your lorry back into either Europe or the UK, and then on the other side, another lorry clips onto the trailer and takes it where it needs to go to, and that way people don't have to...
Around the world, and if you
Sorry.
do come here, then you will be. If you do come here from one of those countries, then you will be. As
Hey,
well
Bim,
taken,
Toff's here.
And put in special accommodation, and the health secretary will be making a further announcement about that tomorrow, Laura. But even if you're not coming from there and you're coming into this country, even if you're a UK national returning to this country, just think what you've got to do. You've got to take a test 72 hours before flying. You've got to do a passenger locator form. You can be kicked off the flight if that doesn't happen, and so on. And then you've got to quarantine, and you'll have the isolation insurance service.
Yeah, but I follow Adam Hills, who does the last leg, the Australian guy. And he went to Australia for Christmas, and he had to fly over, and he's Australian, and stay in a hotel at his own expense for 2 weeks, as does everyone going into Australia, like all these tennis players. So why is it so difficult for us to do that?
Your second point was about test and trace and isolate, and again, yes, we do want to see more people isolating and doing the right thing, but overwhelmingly people are and have been. Don't forget that in addition to the £500, there's a £10,000 fine if you don't. In addition to all the other support that we've offered throughout the pandemic to help people throughout the pandemic, and NHS Test and Trace is now reaching, I think, has a capacity of 800,000 a day. It's absolutely colossal. And if you listen to some of the points that
Cat speed, no.
Chris and I were making earlier on about what we've discovered about the effectiveness of the vaccines, the transmissibility of the virus with the vaccines. That is because of NHS Test and Trace and the vast capacity this country now has for genomic sequencing. So the short answer is yes, I do think people should self-isolate, but NHS Test and Trace is reaching 90% of contacts, and the vast majority of them are doing the right thing.
You shouldn't do U-turns on Forza anyway.
The question about dates is always going to be a matter for ministers. But let me be a bit more helpful than that. There are very clearly two sides to this argument, and both of them are true. There's an incredibly strong set of evidence, which I don't think anyone disputes, that being in school is good for children, it's good for their mental health, it's good for their long-term health. It obviously helps their parents as well. That's not the primary thing, but it's also a very important part of it. So there are really clear medical and educational and societal reasons why being in schools is absolutely the right place to be. And we are confident, and this actually goes back to the fan chart I showed, that the risk to children relative to adults is incredibly low. So we consider school is a safe place for children to be, as well as the right place for children to be. None of that is disputed by anybody. On the other side, and this is also not disputed actually, is that we were managing to hold the line with schools open before we got the new variant in England, B117. With this new variant, which is more transmissible, and I think the evidence for that is really clear now, we had to unfortunately do some additional things, which included the closure of schools to pull down the incredibly high rates of increase we had up to this very high rate we've now currently got at the moment. Now the rates are now coming down, but they're still incredibly high, and if we were to start to take off again from the very high levels we are at the moment, the NHS would get back into trouble extraordinarily fast. So it's essential that people carry on social distancing as they are, but some of these additional measures, like schools, are also very important. And the point where, in a sense, those two balance, where we think we'll feel confident enough that the line can be held with the schools open, to make sure that those first set of things, that the benefits to children are there, is a difficult judgment, and that's one which fundamentally is one for ministers. But those two sets of arguments, I don't think are disputed very much.
Get distracted by a cat.
When is exactly the right moment to balance them?
Thanks very much, Laura. Carl Dillon, ITV.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Given what we've just heard, I think I ought to ask you the schools question then. I mean, the vaccination programme is going so well. We've had so much good news today. Are you absolutely committed to not reopening schools in England before the 8th of March? Or do you think you could pull that forward if things are...
It's that guy with that weird thing where he's...
For example, you managed to vaccinate those first 4 groups.
Got the picture and he's not measured it right, so he's had to put it around the corner. He could have put that picture in between where the gap is, and no one would have noticed. But everyone notices because it's around the corner. Annoying. Sorry.
The death rates, those are already coming down. Is it possible that we are already seeing the effects of the vaccination programme in that death rate?
Carl, let me give you the logic of the March the 8th date for the earliest, which we think it's sensible to open schools. And obviously, I'm very hopeful that we will be able to do that. But let me say why we think that's the prudent date to set. We've got to make a judgment about the effectiveness of the vaccines in bringing down the death rate and bringing down serious illness. And Chris will say a bit more about that at the moment, but that judgment we're going to make in the week of the 15th. We're going to really look at all the data. You'll see some promising stuff from Israel, but at the moment, to the best of my knowledge, we're not yet seeing the kind of conclusive data that we need on that key point. Then we want to be waiting to ensure that after February the 15th, we leave 3 weeks for all the JCVI cohorts 1 to 4, all those most vulnerable groups that you saw on Chris's chart, have allowed their vaccination immunity to
But
be...
then the other problem you've got as well is that they need a second vaccine.
About 3 weeks for it properly.
So the new vaccines are going to fall off a cliff,
So that speaks to
and we'll just have to revaccinate everyone we've already vaccinated, which means the people in the second group, which is your over 50s to 70s, will be getting theirs
So for all those reasons, we
much later, i.e. probably midsummer, late summer. So we'll be back at square one again. But we're still doing better than most other countries for vaccinations.
Urgency, because as Chris has just said, we fought for so hard and
By a
so
lot.
long to try to keep schools open. I think that was a reasonable thing to do. But what we don't want to do now, Carl, now that we're making progress with the vaccine rollout, and we've got a timetable for the way ahead, we don't want to be forced into reverse. And so we think this is the prudent and cautious approach. And we're going to. I think it's much better to stick to that.
And in terms of the other question you asked me, although you can, if you really do multiple analyses, convince yourself there's a bit of a change, the very earliest signs of a change. In reality, what we want to see is a significant reduction in death rate. You can actually see, which actually matters to people, significant numbers coming down. And if you look at the age ranges of people who are dying at the moment, there's no strong evidence yet, and nor, to be clear, would we expect it yet, for reasons I'll come on to, that actually, for example, people in their 80s are suddenly reducing in terms of mortality, but people who are younger ages who are...
Yeah, but there's 9.5 million who've had the first jab, so there's 9.5 million need the second jab.
Now,
All we've done is delay, but I kind of agree why they've done it the way they've done it.
It's true, and this is just building on the point the Prime Minister made.
If I was the Prime Minister and I given the options, I'd have done it this way as well.
To have first effects in older people might be, for the sake of argument, 3 weeks. It takes a further week for them maybe to get infected after that time, first infected, and obviously that risk continues then from then on for a long period of time, and then to get more severely ill, and then in some cases, although a minority of cases, to die. And that's quite a long delay. And although we've got, due to the remarkable efforts of all the people the Prime Minister is talking about, particularly the NHS, in rolling out this vaccine to very high numbers now, it is relatively recent. And the death rates we're seeing at the moment are people who would have been, in terms of the vaccine, you wouldn't have expected to see any effect till going back about 5 weeks, and the rates of vaccination were much lower at that stage. But we do hope that, and anticipate that, it's not just a hope, it's an expectation, that as we go through time, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we will start to see reductions in mortality.
To be fair, they've always said, and I've always said, that there's always a lag from them doing something for us to see the difference of it. And my argument is that the government waits for it to go bad and then decides to do something, but it's going to get worse. So rather than it starting to go bad and then doing something, you wait till it goes bad and then do it, and then we end up where we are now.
10 million people vaccinated. Is it morally right that it continues to be illegal for the over 70s, 80s and 90s not to see relatives who have also been vaccinated and waited their 3 weeks? You're saying that there's not enough data, but don't you have to balance this with the fact that for some of these people, time might be short and you've had pretty strong evidence already? Can't we apply some common sense to people like that in particular rather than criminalising them? And to Chris Whitty, there are some people in government who say that every adult might have had, or at least been offered, a first dose by May and a second dose by the end of August. What do you think of that? And in that case, what's the rationale for social distancing measures in the winter, life not back to normal, which some of your colleagues have suggested might be the case?
Well, Sam, I totally understand people's feelings of frustration and how strongly people want to be able to see their elderly relatives. I would just give a very simple answer. Obviously, those steps have been taken with care homes to make them as COVID secure as possible, to allow people to be visited under very controlled circumstances. But you've seen the numbers in care homes lately, although they're not as bad as they were perhaps as a proportion of the deaths as they were in the first peak. They remain very, very sad, and we are seeing far too many deaths of elderly people, and so we've just got to remain very cautious for the time being. But as you can see, we are making huge progress through those groups, and we'll go on in the weeks ahead. And the time to get everybody done, as you know, can be now measured in weeks and months. So we will get it done as fast as we conceivably can.
In answer to the question you asked me, I mean, optimism is a great thing, but logistics aren't about optimism. They're simply about what numbers you can get through in the right kind of order. And I think the number that May and August strike me as at the very optimistic end. I think if you talk to people who are doing this extraordinarily fast rollout, and if you look at this globally, this is an extraordinarily fast rollout.
May and August.
They would say they will go absolutely hell for leather, as people are doing an incredible job, but those numbers, trying to hit those,
it's got May, July, June, July and August. So it's not May and August.
Remember,
May to August.
It's very important we've got to revaccinate all the people in the first tiers.
No, he listens to me.
So at a certain point, and that point, we had this process of delaying the second dose, largely to increase the number of people we could get through very quickly to begin with, provide that initial
yeah, which makes sense, yeah. But you still have to give them a second dose.
We do have to vaccinate all of them within 12 weeks, and that means that from March we'll be starting to revaccinate as well as the first vaccines, and that will inevitably slow things down. And on winter,
see, they listen to me. It's got little earpiece in.
Implied that
listening to the elder gamer.
Respiratory virus, which is not going to be eradicated from the globe or indeed eliminated from the UK, may surge in winter, is because that's what highly contagious respiratory viruses always do. I think everybody knows that. So it is no surprise to anybody, I think, and should not be, that even if we have a highly successful vaccine rollout, which we clearly are having, and the vaccines work very well, which we very much hope we'll have the solid data on very soon, there will still be residual risk. If you think of flu, which actually is probably less contagious, that's why we managed to get rid of flu completely this year, but with the NPI measures, than COVID.
Which again I predicted.
Surges, despite lots of people
I predicted before Christmas, before winter, that because we're doing all the masks and the social distance and everything, and flu's a lot more difficult to catch, then we're not going to get a flu thing. But the hospitals are still going to be full with people having slips, trips, falls, heart attacks, strokes, that kind of thing. And that's why we needed to do a lockdown.
Thanks, Prime Minister.
Yeah, the Common Sense Party.
A lot about the impact on mental health and those reports that you're looking at.
Oh, that's embarrassing, isn't it? Jason Grove's net bandwidth is low.
And also, the Mail is campaigning for a statue for Captain Tom. Is that something you could back? And to Professor
No.
Whitty, are we past the peak now? It looks like we are from that graph, and lots of people will have seen the video of you being harangued in the street the other day. How did you feel about that? Do you feel in danger?
Well, Jason, on the issue of a statue for Captain Tom, or a public memorial of some kind to Captain Tom, I'm absolutely, of course, open to that. I know that everybody.
Why don't we just do a memorial for everyone who's died, and have Captain Tom in the memorial, along with a nurse, a doctor, and a shop worker, and all that. You know, like they do for the war memorials.
Your campaign is an excellent one.
Yes, I mean, I think that most of my colleagues think we are past the peak. Now, that doesn't mean you could never have another peak, but at this point in time, provided people continue to follow the guidelines, we're on the downward slope of cases of hospitalisations and of deaths in all 4 of the nations of the United Kingdom. So I think we do think at this point, this peak at least, we are past. In terms of being harangued, I mean, you know, the odd young lad showing off occasionally happens. I didn't think anything of it, frankly. I was very surprised it was picked up by the media at all as anything of any importance.
I didn't see it.
He'll become a model citizen in due course, and hopefully more like Captain Tom, who's the kind of person who I think much more exemplifies the spirit of the UK. I mean, he was himself clearly absolutely remarkable, but what he was also doing was showing how it is that everybody has responded to this, and this has been a nationwide, everybody responding. So if it wasn't for that, we would not see those numbers coming down, and that peak you just talked about would not have occurred. That is because...
What's going on with this trouser leg?
Forgive me, Jason, I think you asked me something else, and remind me what it was.
Well, actually, quickly, there's been reports you're very concerned about.
Yeah, true.
Outdoor exercise, yes.
Outdoor exercise, yeah.
Yes. Priority is schools, Jason, but obviously we keep everything under review. The most important thing is to continue to make progress as we are in driving the infection rate.
See, what's left of non-essential retail?
Let's go to...
You're probably looking... Oh, his bandwidth got better. You're on mute, I can see that. I'm in the way there.
You need to unmute.
Oh, there you go.
Prime Minister, when might we expect a date?
Actually, I went the wrong way then. Should have done that, shouldn't I? Oh well.
At the moment, we only told spring. Obviously, February the 15th manages to energise the whole process. And you seem to have changed your approach in the exiting of the lockdown. Previously, it was open where we can. Now it's stay closed until we can all open. Is that fair? And why have you changed your approach? Is it because you're worried about mixed messaging from the previous regional tiers approach? And Professor Whitty, if I could ask you, Dido Harding said today that 20,000 people are not complying with the instruction to isolate. What do you think should be done to improve that compliance rate?
Shoot them. Snipers on
Francis,
the roof outside the house.
I keep an open mind about the regional or the national approach, but at the moment, quite frankly, when you look at the graphs, it's pretty uniform, and there are some variations, and some things are going in slightly different directions in some parts of the country, but it's pretty uniform at the moment.
No, look at Liverpool. Liverpool was in tier 2, and we were all in tier 4, and then Liverpool ended up having a much worse... In fact, they still got the highest, as far as I'm aware, areas of the disease now than we've got, and we were in tier 4 earlier. So tiers don't work. You've got to do all or nothing.
February the 22nd, we will be setting out in as much detail as we...
And don't forget, when London went to tier 4, the trains and the motorways were full of people escaping London and then transmitting the virus everywhere around the UK, which was great. So we should have locked down London.
Setting out a route map, we'll do that again. Though this time,
and then put everyone in, or just put everyone in tier 4 straight away, like they do in other countries. Like they do in Australia. They have one case in Australia, and they shut the entire state down while they figure out where it's gone, and then they'll shrink down to an area where the disease is. And that's what we're not doing. We're waiting for it to get bad.
To surge back in the autumn and over the winter months, as indeed it has. This time, as we go into the second half of the year, we're going to have the confidence of knowing that a huge proportion of the British public, and particularly the most vulnerable, will have been vaccinated and probably received a very high degree of immunity. So that will very much change our approach to the autumn and the winter. Those, as Chris says, highly infectious respiratory diseases don't go away altogether, and not easily.
On the question you asked, I mean, the big risk to the public is the total number of people, and the absolute number will reduce. The biggest thing we can do is actually reduce the total number of people who've got COVID now, because that will reduce the number of contacts. So actually getting the rates down is the single most important thing we can do. But of those who are phoned up because they're a contact, first thing is we should be very grateful to the people who first actually notified, because that's a huge public service to everyone else. And then in terms of their contacts, actually very high proportions of people do self-isolate. But the reason people don't, there are broadly two. There's not realizing how important it is, so they need the positive incentive to do it, and that's very important for people to realize. By doing this, you are making sure you're not the bit of a chain that leads to a vulnerable person at the end. So it's a way of protecting vulnerable people is by self-isolating. People understanding that is absolutely critical to this. And then of course it's about trying to reduce disincentives, and those have been debated at some length. But those are the two things which basically mean whether someone is or is not going to self-isolate.
Just on the question on the timetable for the second wave.
Yes.
When can we expect a bit of clarity around beyond spring, which is a bit vague?
On the second wave of vaccinations, I think what you can expect is that on the 15th we'll say a bit more or about where we've got to, and obviously we're hopeful that we'll have done JCVI 1 to 4, and in that week I expect we'll be saying a bit more about the timetable for doing JCVI 1 to 9 and the priorities thereafter. So that'll be in terms of the
Cheltenham didn't help.
Vaccinations are going. That's what you should more or less expect. But on the 22nd, I hope to be setting out in some more detail is some dates and some possibilities for the whole of the year ahead. Okay, thanks a lot. Let's go to David Hughes of PA.
Prime Minister, it's obviously good news that 10 million people have received their first jabs. Do you have any information yet on how many people are refusing to take the vaccine? And if so, what impact is that going to have on your timetable for easing the lockdown? Professor Whitting,
it's a very interesting room
that Jason raised with you. How alarming is it that this deep into the pandemic, there are still people who don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation, and how frustrating is that for you and your fellow medical professionals?
David, I've been amazed and so encouraged by the way communities are coming together to get the vaccine, to take it. People are taking it up across the whole of the country. I was yes, we have been worried about vaccine hesitancy in some parts of the country, in some communities. That's unquestionably an issue, and we're doing everything we can to encourage people to come forward, to give them all the confidence they need, and they must have confidence. You should have confidence. It's a great thing to get a vaccine. But I think on Monday I was up at the Al Hikma Centre in Batley, talking to community leaders there who've done an amazing job and got I think the vaccination rate for the over 80s in that part in Yorkshire is now 97%, including all communities. So it's a real achievement, and I would urge everybody to follow the example of Yorkshire if you're not already there.
I mean, the data, and this links both to what the Prime Minister just said and the question you asked me, the data is that vaccine acceptance, understanding by the general population of the importance of vaccine is incredibly high in the UK compared to almost any other comparative country. And I think people do understand the importance. They understand how to balance the huge benefits against any things they're concerned about. Am I alarmed about that? It's going to be a noisy group of people who disagree with virtually anything. But actually, there is no clear evidence. There's a large groundswell of opinion. The great majority of people fully understand the issues. They've stuck extraordinarily well over an incredibly long period of time to the very difficult lockdown and other measures. And they've done that because they understand that this is the way that you protect the vulnerable in society. And that is the overwhelming majority of the population. And I think it's very easy to lose that sense of perspective. It is the overwhelming majority of people who have done so, understand it. And if you don't think that this is a big issue, go and talk to a doctor or a nurse who works in a hospital, and they'll put you right very fast.
Thanks, David. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.
See you next time. Waffle, bluster. There's only two of them today. I thought the other person was just having a little stand there and not doing anything. But no, there can be only two. Highlander. So there you go then. Waffle, waffle, bluster, bluster, nothing really exciting or new. It's got to be said, vaccines seem to be going right, but like I said before, he said that they've got to do the second vaccines for these 10 million people, or 9.5 million who've only had one vaccine dose, so that's going to slow it down for everyone else. So we're not actually going to get anywhere. I think anyone who disobeys the rules repeatedly should be shot, because they're the ones who ruin it for everyone else. You know, the government are too slow reacting at things, and like I said much earlier on this broadcast, they wait for it to get bad and then decide to do a lockdown, and then it just gets worse because you've got that time delay of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and whatever. And even if you do a lockdown, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Now it's getting better. The vaccines will only kick in a few weeks' time, and then the double vaccines and everything else. So I think we're in where we are for quite a long while. But yeah, it is finally coming the right way. And the only thing the government seems to have done right is this vaccination thing. I agree with the giving as many people one dose first, as quickly as you can, and then giving them a second dose later on. But I mean, you look at other countries and it's going wrong in other countries as well at the minute. I follow a lot of Twitter feeds, news feeds for different parts of the world, and yeah, it's going very, very wrong in very, very many countries. And we seem to be the only one at the moment who seems to be doing the vaccine in the right way. But anyway, it could be wrong. Let's wait and see. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed you still are. And I will see you all again later. Until then, I'll be seeing you.